Monday, June 2020, at 18:19 a.m. I realize it's strange to post this as a near-death experience. Near-death experiencers are the only people who have been able to relate to this account. My experience is similar to NDE accounts I've read since having the experience and trying to figure out what happened. I was perfectly healthy, didn't use drugs, and didn't sleep. Until the experience, I was wide awake and in a perfectly normal state of consciousness. At the age of 22, I ended my relationship with my boyfriend, who had no plans to marry or have children. I knew I wanted both of them. This completely devastated me because I adored him. Sundays were the most difficult days for me. Monday through Saturday, I had classes, but on Sundays, all I had to do was laundry and fold socks alone in my apartment. I recall sitting in deep depression, folding my socks, and then hearing a church bell ring down the street. I was raised without any religious beliefs. I've been a self-proclaimed atheist since I was 5 years old, when I discovered there was no Easter Bunny and my mother was Santa Claus. I put 2 and 2 together and came to the conclusion that the Tooth Fairy was a hoax, and thus God was as well. I was an ardent atheist until junior high, when I started reading about theoretical physics and ESP. I began to suspect that there was something beyond what my physical senses could detect, but I still had serious doubts, and most religions made me laugh. The ringing church bell, which I mentioned earlier, reminded me of going to see my grandmother when I was a child. She lived across the street from a church in an apartment. We never went to church because my grandmother was also an atheist, a former Anglican. However, I recall being fascinated by the people entering the church as I looked out the window. As a teenager, I went to church a few times with friends, including once to a Catholic church, where no one could understand what the priest was saying, despite the fact that he was speaking in English. He spoke with a heavy French accent. During Mass, my friend's mother would read a novel hidden in her missal. I also visited a synagogue and a Protestant church with friends. The church bells made me think that I should go to church and see if there's anything there for me. It was something to do, and it appeared to work for a large number of people. The nearby church was a Catholic church. I plucked up the courage to go check it out the following Sunday. I went to Mass and was quite perplexed by all the standing and sitting. I was uneasy because everyone seemed to know what to say, and I had no idea what to do. I was especially struck by the emphasis on the Trinity, and I wondered why it seemed to be such a central focus of the church. For example, everyone kept crossing themselves as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I went to services for several weekends because I didn't have anything else to do, and it kept me from sitting at home crying. The emphasis on the Trinity continued to perplex me. I knew it meant Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but I wasn't sure what that meant. It just didn't make sense to me that they would worship a God who was 3 things at the same time. How could that be? How could God be both transcendent, all-powerful, and all-knowing if God is transcendent, all-powerful, and all-knowing? Humans were limited in their knowledge and did not know everything. Humans are not immortal. How can God be both of these things at the same time? And who or what was the Holy Spirit? Ghost. This was a complete mystery to me. Finally, my curiosity got the best of me, and I scheduled a consultation with a priest. I told them that I was thinking about becoming a Catholic, but first I needed to understand something. On a Saturday, I was surprised to see a young priest in his 30s when I entered the priest's office. At the Mass, I hadn't noticed him. I told him that I was trying to understand Catholicism and that the most important feature, as they seemed to emphasize so much in the service, seemed to me to be the Trinity. I requested that he explain it to me. How can God be 3 things at the same time? He paused for what seemed like an eternity before responding. He claimed that you could only understand it if you were born a Catholic. What a sham, I exclaimed. That was the end of it, and he escorted me out. I was extremely disappointed and enraged by his response. The following day was Sunday. I went to church anyway, despite the fact that I thought the priest was a jerk and that the religion had no substance because he couldn't even answer a question that seemed so central to their faith. The Mass went on as usual. When it was finished, I stood up to leave, and the woman seated behind me smiled and asked if I wanted to stay after the service for testimonials. I had no idea what she was on about or how unusual this was for a Catholic church, but she was very nice, and I didn't have anything else to do at home except fold socks and cry. After a brief intermission, the testimonials began. I'd moved to a different pew on the opposite side of the church and hadn't seen the lady anywhere. People took turns going up on stage, which was really an altar space, but I didn't know what to call it, and speaking about how Christ had changed their lives. Again, I had no idea that this was unusual for a Catholic church. The speakers actually moved me quite a bit. I started to feel something emotional well up inside of me. After a while, however, the stories all seemed to be the same, and my mind began to wander. I began to consider the Trinity. What exactly was it? I just couldn't accept that it could only be understood by Catholics. I reasoned that if I thought about it long enough, I'd be able to figure it out. I began to ponder its significance. What exactly was the Trinity? How is it possible for God to be three people at the same time? I ruminated on this for a long time. Then something strange occurred. I must have stopped having vocalized thoughts because my mind went blank, and in front of me was a person. A gigantic, huge person. He sat directly in front of the altar, but his head rested on the church's ceiling. I immediately recognized him as Jesus, despite the fact that I had never seen an image of Jesus seated. He was robed at the time, and his hand was raised in what I now recognize as a blessing gesture, but I didn't recognize it at the time. I moved toward him, despite the fact that my body did not move at all outside of the pew. I was either drawn to him or moved toward him. I'm not sure which one it is. As I got closer, I realized just how massive he was. I was at the bottom of his feet, but I didn't stop there. I started moving through the air toward his face. He said something when I got to the level of his face, but his lips didn't move. I just heard the word inside me, but it was more of a knowing than an audible sound. He stated, "I am the path. Please follow me." I seemed to agree as I continued to move up, and the church's ceiling disintegrated. I jumped up and out of the building, into the sky. Then I started moving at breakneck speed. I dashed into the heavens. I met the Holy Spirit at some point, way up in space. It wasn't like an icebreaker. My consciousness suddenly spread in all directions at the same time. My mind opened up and expanded until I could see, hear, feel, and know everything in all directions at the same time. It gave me a sense of complete omniscience. I knew it was the Holy Spirit. This was entirely my doing, as revealed by the Holy Spirit. Omniscience had a great power that spread throughout the universe. It held it all together, while also being the energy that holds all of reality together through all time and all space within it. I had flashes of all knowledge, all that would happen, and all that had already happened. I don't remember any of the details now, but I do remember being filled with the Holy Spirit and having this vast knowledge. I kept moving forward. Beyond this omniscient spatial and knowledge awareness, I moved toward a great light. The closer I got, the bigger it got, and it drew me in with the most joyful love I'd ever known. I realized he was the Father when this great light enveloped me. I knew him, and he knew who I was. He adored me more than I could have imagined. Realizing how much he cared for me was a surreal experience. I moved into his being and was completely surrounded by his love. At that point, I had merged with him and his love to the point where I was barely aware of my individuality, but I was still aware of myself, and that he was the Father. I'm not sure how I could be one with him and alone at the same time, but it was true. My feelings of love were indescribable. There are no words to express how I feel. There is no earthly love that can compare to the love of a mother, father, sibling, husband, or child. It was all of those things and more. There was light everywhere. I could have stayed there all day. I, however, did not. I gradually became more aware of my body. It was as if I was still engulfed in this blazing ball of God's love. But now I was superimposed on the scene. My body appeared first, followed by the room, the church, and the pew where I was sitting. I then realized I was sobbing uncontrollably, and a lady sitting next to me was holding my hand out of concern for me. Finally, I regained complete consciousness of myself in the church. In my body, I was there. I was seated in a pew. My hand was being held by a stranger. The testimonials were finished, and people were getting up and leaving. When I turned to face the lady next to me, she handed me a Kleenex. I was still enveloped in God's loving light. I hadn't been separated from Him. I could still feel Him, but I couldn't see Him, and the light wasn't everywhere. I was back in normal lighting conditions. I stood up and walked home in a daze. The euphoria lasted for months but gradually faded. I can only feel it now, 25 years later, when I meditate deeply on the experience. At times, I believe I heard a voice say to me, "I am always with you." I can't say that I've always been happy in the last 25 years. In fact, I have gone through some very difficult times, even feeling as if God had abandoned me. I don't believe He ever did. It's because I'm not open to Him that I'm experiencing darkness and confusion. I enrolled in an RSIA program immediately following my experience, but I did not join the Catholic Church because I reconnected with my boyfriend, who decided that he just might get married after all. However, he was anti-Catholic and even anti-Christian, so I wasn't a Christian for a long time. We got married, had 2 kids, and have been together ever since. I felt called to return to a Catholic church 4 years ago. I picked up a bulletin in the narthex and discovered that an RSIA program was beginning that night. I went with them. I went home and told my husband that I was going to become a Catholic and that he might want to come with me. He did show up. We stayed for a year. We both became Catholic at the end of the year on the Easter Vigil. I was christened, confirmed, and received my first Eucharist. When I was baptized, I felt an overwhelming presence of the Holy Spirit and was completely immersed in God's wonderful, loving light. I've been a Catholic for 3 years and am still amazed and pleased by all the truths I've discovered in theology. I believe it is the church that Christ established, and I know He showed me the way to it. I am now studying Carmelite spirituality, specifically Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, Therese of Lisieux, and Elizabeth of the Trinity. I believe I have discovered my spiritual brothers and sisters. I'm not sure why I was so fortunate to have had this experience, but I'll be eternally grateful to Jesus, the Way Shower, and God for it. I've had no other out-of-body experiences since this one. I am not afraid of death. Actually, I'm looking forward to it because I know I'll be reunited with God's loving light, the Father.